So I have been a member of the Buena Vista Heritage. I'm a founding member. I signed the incorporation papers for the museum down there. And over these 49 years, I've collected, we have probably 2,000 or 3,000 photos. And I have a couple pictures that if I had thought about having Lindsay, she could have blown these up and shown you, but I'll let you pass them around. There are a couple of places I'm talking about. But I want to tell you some of the early history of the Buena Vista Fire Department. It was called the DeReamer Hook and Ladder Company. It was a two-name, D-E, and then capital R-E-M-E-R. And the man who was president of the company was J. DeReamer, obviously. That's why they named it. But the man who put the money up, and this is 1881, you guys. The man who put the money up for this was George Merriam. He was a major, left from the Civil War. This is 1881. He came here and he put up the money for the fire department. He bought all their uniforms. He bought the livery for all they had is horses pulling the fire wagons and the hose carts. And he bought all that. So he must have come off from the Civil War with some money. And the firefighters had a hall, which I've got a picture here, which I'll send around. This picture is the hall where the firemen they got it in 1885, I think. Anyhow, this picture is 1899, and the firehouse had, it was a white building. You know where I'm trying to think, it's across the street from the Orpheum on Main Street. It's down the street about half a block from the Simple Eatery. You know where that is. And I think there's some kind of a little restaurant there. Anyhow, it even had a fire bell. But before they got their fire bell, they called people by taking up one of those big old anvils that you stand up and pounding on it. That's how they called people when they had a fire, because they were all volunteers. No cell phones, no any other way to get a hold of them. So sometimes they had people coming from all different places because they could hear, and then people didn't know and say, "What is that noise?" Well, it was the... In 1884, there was another fire company that came, and it was called the Buena Vista Hose Company. And evidently there was some rivalry, because the DeReamer Hook and Ladder and the Buena Vista Hose Company evidently didn't get along, but somehow, and I don't know, I haven't found any records, they did finally get together to work on that firehouse building. So you didn't hear any more, so they must have merged. But there's no paperwork or anything. There were a number of bad fires that came through town. Remember, the town was all wood buildings. After these bad fires in 83 and 84, then you start seeing brick buildings. And the brick buildings, most of the brick was made down towards Johnson's Village. A couple places there were brick, that they actually made the brick, so they used the local. In fact, the courthouse is made with that brick. So anyhow, the first fire that I have records of was in 1883, and it started, and some of the fires started from the firebox on the train, the Rio Grande train. The tracks are still there. That's a Rio Grande. But this fire started in a mining building, a mining exchange it was called. It didn't have mining stuff in there, but maybe they did the records. Started there, and then the wind came up. You know how the wind is in this country. And it swept down and burned the whole block. Most of this block, and there's a picture here, you'll see some of the wood buildings, but this isn't the block that burned. The block that burned was from the railroad tracks to Crave. There was a whole block of buildings there, a block of buildings. There was a mercantile store and all this stuff, and it all burned to the ground. And they got the firemen there in 5 minutes, it said. But you know how they put out a fire here? They had hose carts, which they pulled, the men pulled. They had races with other fire departments with their hose carts. They had to pull, and then they had to hook them up. We did have fire hydrants in town. There were fire hydrants because they brought water out of Cottonwood, you know, where the town gets their water, but they ran ditches, and they had a fire hydrant. So they had to undo what's on the hydrant. I don't know anything about this, but then they had to hook up the hose. And the hose had a big thing like this that you had to crank around. I've seen pictures. that's how then they hooked up to try and put the fires out. So you can imagine when a bad fire is going and the wind is blowing. It was a bad time. The damage on this block of Main Street was $15,000 to $18,000, burned the whole block. The bank that was there was the Hiller Hallock Company, and that I knew this old Mr. Hallock. He was really old, older than me when I was a kid. I've been here since 1949. Anyhow, he was pretty well known, and he had the bank, and he said he had insurance that covered the $2,000 he lost on the building. Well, think, in an 1883 fire, things weren't worth very much. If one of the banks burned down now, that wouldn't cover anything. Wouldn't even cover the postage stamps to send the letters out. The volunteer fire department had these hose cart races, and they hooked up the hoses. The men would pull the hose cart, and then they had races in Leadville, Salida, Buena. I don't know if they had any in Fairplay. I didn't hear, but the other two towns. And they had to hook this up, and the first team to hook it up and get the water on would win prizes. And this Major Merriam, when they had the races in BV, he gave prizes. I never did hear what the prizes were, but he furnished the prizes for the team that won. And BV had a man named Alphonse Enderlein, and his wife was Elizabeth Spurgeon. Elizabeth Spurgeon was a madam who came here in about 1885, and Charlotte Merrifield, that I knew, that's dead, told me that she was a little girl and remembers her mother telling, Charlotte wasn't here when Elizabeth Spurgeon came, but her mother was, because that was a very old family, the Vickersons, and her mother said everybody in town knew that this was a madam because she had 3 trunks worth of clothes. Because most women who traveled on the train and got off at the Rio Grande train maybe had 1 trunk. Anyhow, eventually she married this Alphonse Enderlein, and he was on the fire department and had been back active in the fire department. They had a race, I think it was in Leadville, where the BV team was competing with the other one, and when they got the hose hooked up and they turned the water on, he had not tightened it, and it blew off, and the BV team lost that race. And they were so upset. His name was Alphonse. They called him Foozy. They said he foozled the hose. Now, but they did call him Foozy Enderlein. I've seen that name used after that happened. But, with your name is Alphonse, it could have been part of his name. But anyhow, I thought that was always funny. In 1904, there's a photo we have at the museum of one of the hose cart teams in front of the courthouse. I think I had it in the paper a few months ago. All these kids, young men, lined up, and they had uniforms on. I think they were kind of white, and they were like 8 of them, and the hose cart behind them. But there was one man standing not in the lineup, but just right behind him, and he had a kind of a dark suit on. Well, the story about him I got from the Crimble family. His father was Sheriff Hugh Crimble, and this was his son, Will. And Will had caught a fish on the creek by the High Rocky, where that bridge is, and the game warden said it was undersized and he couldn't keep it. But he didn't know what to do with it, so he put it in his boot and went home, and his dad found it, and the dad said, "You've got to go pay the fine." And he said, "I don't have any money," so his dad put him in jail. Now, this is a true story. I've got this from the Crimbles. So he went to jail, and then when they had this race, he couldn't be in it, but they wanted a picture of the thing, so the dad let him, the jail is right behind the courthouse where the administration building, so the dad let him come out and be in the picture, but he's in a dark outfit instead of the... I thought that was another good story. I love all these stories. To me, that's the best part of the history, of course. And in 1908, there was a fire alarm, and the firemen were called, and they rushed there, and guess what it was? The drunk that was in the jail had set fire. Now, this is not the jail at the courthouse. This was the town jail. And so this could be where the slammer is, or the jailhouse. It could be that building. Anyhow, he had set fire to the trash in his bucket and his mattress, and the fire department had to go put it out, and the story says, and with a bucket they put the fire out and calmed him down too, so I guess they dumped water on him. So this wonderful firehouse that I sent the picture around It burned in 1934. And the Crimble brothers, this is Sheriff Hugh Crimble's grandsons in 1934, it was Ronnie and Hugh Crimble. They had made a glider, and I gave this to the guy that's doing some airport history. They had made a glider, a handmade glider, and they got it up in the air by pulling it with the whatever car they had on the rodeo grounds as fast as they could until they got it in the air. And the sister was there, and there is a picture of it. It's a real bad picture because pictures were this big, but they actually got it in the air. So when the firehouse caught on fire in 1934, boy, were they unhappy because their glider was inside the firehouse. And it burned up, so we never even had a picture of it except this little one in the air. And they did. The firemen were so good, they got out the hose cards and they got out a couple other things. So, see, they were really good. They just didn't get the glider out. And I have a little more, but I think we better let Robert talk because I don't know what all he's going to tell you. I hope he's going to tell us how we can keep having a forest fire this year. Although I know you're not with the Forest Service, you're with the county. So we do have, having lived here since 1949, I can remember some fires, but they were nothing like what happened when we burned all these mountains. So Robert Bertram, here he is.
All right, those of you that I haven't met, I'm Robert Bertram. I'm the fire chief for Chaffee County Fire. So a little bit about me. I've been playing on fire trucks in July will actually be 30 years since I started doing firefighting stuff. So been fortunate to make this a career, and so here I am. So I plan on giving you a little bit of history of the fire department, as well as kind of going to the operations, how we're governed, and then some things we're looking at in the future. The history portion's very important. You know, it's great to know about BV history, but that's a huge part of our firefighters when they come in. They have to go through a 2-hour history class. So we learn kind of from everybody's mistakes and why we ended up where we're at. So a little bit about the fire department itself. So in the early 1970s, we got together. We had a couple of fire departments in the county. You had Salida Fire Department, you had Poncha Springs Fire Department, and you had Buena Vista Fire. So everything outside of the town really wasn't covered, didn't have fire protection. So if it was close to town, the Buena Vista Fire would go out and attack some of these fires, but there wasn't fire protection. So in the early 70s, they got together to create a Northern Chaffee County Fire Protection District. So that was put in place in 1976. And so the boundary was at the boundary of the school district, of the Buena Vista School District. So it was just the northern part of the county, and originally included the town of Buena Vista. But shortly after that, through court action, the town of Buena Vista annexed from the fire district. So we had the 2 fire departments there. So when they did that, they built 3 fire stations. They built the one in Nathrop, the one out on County Road 306, and then one north of Buena Vista, and it was served by volunteers. And then, as we went through in the early 80s, they got together and realized there's still more people in the county that didn't have fire protection. So that was the southern part of the county. So working with DOLA and a few other organizations, I went to the voters and basically opted everybody who was not in a fire district, so outside the town limits of Salida and South Ark Fire, they opted them into the fire district, which included the town of Poncha Springs. So the town of Poncha Springs Fire Department was now included in Chaffee County Fire Protection District. So that's kind of brought us to where we're at today. We cover over 1,000 square miles. So anytime you're traveling over a pass out of the county, that's our district boundaries. Like I said, we cover everything except for the town of Salida itself. And so currently we have 6 fire stations spread out throughout the county, and mainly staffed by volunteers. Volunteerism is a big thing. I mean, 70% of fire departments nationwide right now are volunteer. So we do rely heavily on volunteers. We have 10 staff positions. Obviously myself as the fire chief. We have a fire marshal's division. Our fire marshal does all the commercial plan reviews, so any of the big buildings being put up or subdivisions is all reviewed through our fire marshal office. And then underneath her is we have an inspector that does commercial building inspections. So any business you go into throughout the county, we have to go in and inspect yearly to be able to make sure it's safe for you guys to be in there. Outside of that, we have our maintenance division, which we have our main mechanic, we have a facilities maintenance person, and an equipment maintenance person. So with having, the 6 fire stations, a couple other buildings, and over 49 pieces of apparatus, it takes quite a few people to maintain them. And each one of these apparatus have, up to 8 small engines on them. So it's a lot of work to be able to keep that going, to be able to make sure it's ready when we have the emergency. So we have 3 people in there. And then our training division, we've got our training captain, who's responsible for teaching all of our classes. We do most of our classes in-house. So our firefighter 1 training, wildland certifications, all of that, we do in-house. So we do the state certifications and testing. Those of you that have driven through Nathrop, you've seen the containers sitting out there, the Conex containers. That's what we use for training. We start fires in them and go practice putting them out. So there's lots of different scenarios we can do in there. We can set it up different ways to simulate different house setups. Eventually, we actually just put a bunch of containers out there. We're getting ready to put a 3rd story on there. Just as you've driven around town here, you see we've got a lot more 3-story buildings. So we need to start practicing getting in those 3-story buildings. So, so we've got our training captain does that. We have underneath him is a recruitment retention coordinator. His job is trying to recruit volunteers into there, and our residents, which I'll get into here in a little bit. So he does that, does all the initial training. So if anybody's interested in being a volunteer, we have volunteers from actually 18 to 79 active volunteers. So all huge age range, and so we're always looking for people. So if you know anybody, that'd be great. And then beside that, staff-wise, we have last year we created a new position, which is a wildland mitigation coordinator. And their whole job is running our mitigation programs and mitigation programs, keeping track of our wildland certifications, and they're going to be running our deployment program. And I'll get a little bit more into the mitigation programs here in just a few minutes. And then the additional staff we have is I have an administrative assistant to help me with keep organized. So let's see. So besides staff, volunteers, we have a resident program. 4 years ago, we started a resident program, which is like a 2-year internship. So currently they're housed in Nathrop. 4 years ago, we purchased a house down there, which is right next to the fire station. We set it up for the residents to live in. So what they do is we provide housing, we provide electricity, internet, which is actually probably the most important thing. It's funny, never thought about when you get this group of kids. So this is usually high school, just getting out of high school, wanting a career in firefighting. We actually had the furnace went out for 3 days, never heard anything. But the internet went down for 10 minutes. We knew about it as soon as possible. So trying to get used to the younger demographic. But these guys are great. So they work a shift schedule for us. And so they work 24 hours. So during the daytime, they're working with our staff, working on projects. And then at night, they're on call from that house. And if they're all there, we have 5 of them ready to go at all times, hopping on the trucks. And we're going to expand the program to Poncha Springs. Hopefully soon. We've been working on an expansion down our Poncha Springs station for a couple years now. We're almost well over a year behind schedule on it. So hopefully we'll be able to get that done. Once we get that open up, we'll have staffing down there too with our resident program. So it's an exciting thing for us being able to provide that a little bit better response to the community. So going back to the wildland portion. So several years ago we worked with the county, and several other agencies came together to do the new Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is a really big deal, kind of looking at the problem in the county, the potential for wildland fire, all of that. So we came together and came up with an action plan. And a lot of that was trying to figure out what we can do for when the big fire does come. Back in the last major fire we had, we had Decker that kind of came on the southern end of the county, but prior to that, we've not had a major fire in the county for over 100 years. Early, about 1902, we had the whole mountain range burn up. What a huge fire, kind of on both sides of the divide, but we have not seen anything since then. And it's always one of the things we've looked at. It's not a question of if we're going to get a fire, it's when we're going to get it. If anybody's been up towards St. Elmo recently, Monarch Pass, most of that spruce is dead up there. So it's definitely something that we're worried about. And one of the biggest things that we realized through this plan and everything else, and what we're trying to do as the fire department is we can have all the money in the world and all the firefighters be able to throw out the fire, but if we haven't done anything to prevent it, try to lessen the effect when it hits these subdivisions, we're not going to be able to do anything. And that's a tough reality we've got to look at. And so through that community wildfire protection plan, we've come together to do different, come up with different programs. There's lots of money coming into the county for doing mitigation work. We have large-scale mitigation projects going on, as well as the local level. What we've done is Chaffee Fires. We've got a program called Chaffee Chips. And so we select different subdivisions every year, and we do 3-day events. So we encourage homeowners to go out, do mitigation work around their property, and they put piles out by the end of their road. And then we come along and pick them up. Through grants, through Envision, we were able to purchase these dump trailers as well as mini excavator. So we can just come along and pick that up. All the slash that we pick up, we send to the landfill. The landfill purchase a big tub grinder. So they grind that up so people can get mulch there, as well as they use it to cover the landfill. And so that program, we're on our 3rd year of Chaffee Chips, as well as with these trailers, when we're not using it for Chaffee Chips, we have them available for the community. So $50, we'll drop it off at your house. You can fill it up with slash, and we haul it away. So that's a program we do. Yeah. So we originally started with 1 trailer. We've got 4 trailers there. So our wildland mitigation coordinator is busy running these programs. He's always doing that. As well as with the trailers, we use that we work with the Chaffee rec adopters and do the campsite cleanups. So far this year, I believe we're up to 10,000 pounds of waste and ash we've hauled out of dispersed camping this year. Last year, we had about 15,000 pounds that we've taken out. So trying to make it a little bit better out there. And the great thing when they go out to do the campsite cleanups, they're reducing the size of some of these fire rings, and even some of the ones that are not in good places, they're just getting rid of. So trying to keep us safe. So, so lots of things we try to do for the community when we're out there. But now, as outside of response, I should say. And then as far as call response, one of the things we were looking at history of calls. So, started as a volunteer fire department. Now we're gradually adding staff. Our call volume in the last 10 years has more than doubled. We're getting more people out in the community, more people visiting, and just, overall, it's a lot different. And, and we're constantly working to figure out how we're going to deal with that increased call volume. We actually looked at, from about 2000 to 2010, we were pretty even our call volume. But since 2010, it's just been increasing. And can't really find any good reason for it other than just we're getting more people. And that becomes a challenge. As we look forward, obviously the forest health is a challenge. What we're going to do in the future. Volunteerism. Any of you guys that are part of a volunteer group, volunteerism's down, just in general. And that's the same thing in firefighting. It's a national problem. I mean, we actually have conferences about trying to recruit volunteers and how do we do that? It's just different. People don't have the same sense of volunteerism as they used to, and trying to get people to stick around. The average span of a volunteer right now is about 2 to 3 years that we can keep them, which is coincidentally about the same as most people stay at a job. Back then, years ago, we'd have people to stick around for 10, 15 years, or 20 years, or 4. Vern's got, Ron Hassel, I think, is on 45.
45 years.
Yeah, so he was here since it started in 1976. So we have some of those volunteers still active right now. Our volunteers, we have a pension program for them. After 20 years, they get a pension. We pay out $190,000 a year to our pensioners from people that have served the community over the years.
I didn't know that. That's good.
But now, we don't know if we'll ever see a 10-year pensioner again. And that's the true reality, which is difficult, trying to do that. And,
Are your volunteers always, they're volunteer to fight fires, or do you have volunteers to do other things?
So our main thing was we had volunteers to fight fires. We are developing a new program for people that want to help out in other ways. We've actually brought back some of our old retirees to be part of this group. One of them, and not just retirees from here. We've got a retired Aurora firefighter, the previous Buena Vista chief, Daryl Pratt, is part of our group, and they come out, they play on the trucks during testing day, So we just did a firefighter 1 test yesterday, a state test, and Daryl was out there on the pump panel helping out. And then so we're looking at developing this for if we've got a major fire, getting some people together to, bring us food, drinks, those type of things, or even on regular trainings, trying to provide lunches. So we're working on kind of getting that program together to be able to incorporate more volunteers with that.
I took the AED class,
Mhm.
first responder. Is there a list of people that you could, in case of an emergency, that you can call out on to see if they could help with bringing water or just doing anything?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's, kind of the thing, like I said, eventually we're going to try to promote this group a little bit more to be able to do these things, but it's not quite there yet. We just got a small group, yeah.
This would be helpful.
Yeah.
Because you would know, like, okay, here's all these people that are first responders.
Yeah, exactly.
Do the volunteers get paid?
They do not.
No.
So that's the key thing was, so as a volunteer,
They get retirement.
so they get a retirement. So our benefits to our volunteers, we provide our active volunteers with gym memberships because staying in shape is important. Right now they get a per call stipend. They get $5 per call to kind of make up for fuel, which is hardly anything. We're actually looking at revamping our volunteer program quite a bit because how we've been operating for the last 15, 20 years isn't necessarily the way we may need to look at in the future. So we do provide stipends for covering shifts and everything to our volunteers, but the biggest thing is we can't pay volunteers hourly, and we can't pay them more than a 15% of what a full-time staff member would be by law. So we're always evaluating that. I mean, one of the things is, true volunteerism, you don't get paid, but we're finding out we've got to find a way to get some money in their pocket. As we know up here too, I mean, the cost of living is so high. It's, some of the younger ones that want to be good volunteers are working 2 and 3 jobs just trying to make ends meet. And then, a lot of people that have time are retired, but they really don't want to be on their hands and knees dragging a hose through the house. So we're always trying to work on all of that, trying to figure out, how to move forward. So that's definitely one of our challenges. And, as we progress with volunteers too, is, years ago, if you wanted to volunteer for a fire department, you would show up, they'd say, okay, here's the gear, here's how you get in the door. When your pager goes off, the alarm goes off, you get in the gear and sit on the truck, and then we figure it out from there. Now things have changed quite a bit. You've got to go through a minimum 40 hours of training before you even get assigned to a station. And then you've got a year to sign off a bunch of tasks. And that's just to be useful and ride the truck, and hold the stop sign, do all that. If you want to go into burning buildings, that's a whole nother class. We just finished up, we started in January, we just finished up yesterday our Firefighter 1 Academy, which is a huge commitment. And in college, that's a 12 credit hour class that you've got to go through. And for Fire 1, and then you've got hazmat operations class, which is another 3 credit hour class. And so we teach all that, and that's a lot for a volunteer that has to go, to go through. And you've got practical tests, and you've got state testing, all of that, which, years back we didn't have to go through all that. There's a lot more certification, a lot more demand and training.
How many students were, in the class you just
So we just had 7 completed.
7?
Mm-hmm. Which is, yes, yep. We actually had one. She's our facilities maintenance person, Deb. She just completed Fire 1, and then one of our proctors is our fire marshal, Kira, and she.
Volunteers?
No, they're paid staff now.
Yeah. But
Yep.
do you have volunteers?
So right now we have two volunteers.
And Suzy's interested, I think. So
Yeah.
She loves getting down on her
So,
knees, playing with hoses.
but yeah, so aside from the challenges of the volunteers and everything, some of the challenges we're facing on the fire department right now too is the growth in the county, but as well as in town. If you look all the buildings if you go down Arkansas, they're right next to each other. We got the higher density housing. We've got 3-story buildings with, housing above it. We've got things we didn't have to worry about before, sprinkler systems, alarm systems. Everything's getting a lot more complex, which makes it pretty difficult, when we look at, having the volunteer who's trying to spend the time and learn all this stuff, as well as even it's hard for the paid staff to keep up on all that. And that's part of the learning curve, but it's definitely a different demand on the fire department we've had in the past. Back years ago, if you got an acre of property in a house, if the house, catches on fire, you don't have to worry about spreading. Now we've got to worry about it spreading from building to building, all of that, like the early fires in the, 1800s. So,
Y'all are I should know this, but I don't look at my valuation statement. Y'all are supported by mill levy?
Yes.
yes,
And so.
I'll dive into that here in a few. Maybe that's what more people are interested in. But and like I said, the other thing we're facing too is the different in public expectations. Back in the 70s, everybody knew that if there was a fire, they'd wait for Cogans and McMurrays to get in off the ranch, get to the fire station, and get out there. Now, we've got a lot of people moving from the city, and response in the city is a lot different than rural areas. So we're kind of that change in expectations of the fire department we're really seeing too. And so that's where we're trying with our staffing, being able to do that, to be able to get a much quicker response out to the community, and trying to figure out how we can do that more in the future. So kind of a little bit about how we're governed. So we are a Title 32 special district. So we're not part of the county. We are our own governmental entity. And what that means under Title 32, that is what governs everything that we do. So we have to follow, Colorado budget laws. We have to follow, Open Records Act, open meetings. All of our meetings, we post on our website, and they're always open to the public, our fire board meetings. So we're governed by 5 board of directors. So I've got 5 bosses, and those are elected by the public. So everybody that's in Chaffee County Fire's district is able to vote. Now, we did have a little bit of confusion. I'll get into the whole BV IGA, but our last election, we did have some people that were upset who lived in town and could not vote for a board of directors. And so to be eligible to vote in our elections, you have to either own property or live in the fire district. And so, like I said, there was a little bit of confusion the last election with that, but it's just kind of how the laws are. We can't really do anything about that. But yeah, everything we do is governed by the Title 32. So it's not, we can't just make stuff up as much as we'd like to. So as far as budget, I have to present the budget to my board of directors by October 15th of every year. And then we have to adopt the budget by December 15th of every year and certify our mill levies. So kind of some history with the BV IGA. I know some people were kind of curious about that. So back in, I think, the end of 2020, we got together with the town and started having a conversation about what it would look like to combine the fire departments. One thing is really looking at the way we were set up. We had 3 fire stations in the town limits. We had 2, Buena Vista had 1. Each of these stations were 1.3 miles apart. Big cities don't even have them that close together. And so the duplication of having fire engines and everything in each of these, it really didn't make sense to us. Now, we know it had been kind of a contentious thing. Obviously, the town, through legal action, pulled out of Northern Chaffee County Fire District in 1976. I've got files in my office of about every 2 years this conversation came up about combining the fire departments from, back a long time ago. But we approached it a little bit differently this time. We came together with the town and created a steering committee. The steering committee consisted of 2 of my board of directors, myself, the town administrator, who was Philip Puckett at the time, and 2 of the town trustees. And we came together, developed a steering committee. The steering committee was actually originally created to look into creating a fire authority. Fire authority is another statutory organization which creates basically another overhead government. So it would create its own authority board, all of that to govern the fire district, but would truly be combining the town and the fire district. And we started going down that road, evaluating funding, evaluating calls. We had several meetings together in the fire authority steering committee. And ultimately we were approached by the town, and a couple of the trustees were involved in there, asked if we could just simplify things and do an intergovernmental agreement. And so we started looking at that, and that really simplified things. The intergovernmental agreement was essentially the town paying us to cover the the town.
City limits, yeah.
Yeah, the city limits are there. And so that made things a little bit easier, a little bit less expensive too, by the time you get all these agreements together. And so we came together, we had to come up with a funding arrangement. And really what we did funding arrangement is we took the valuation of the properties in town and applied our mill levy to it and be able to come up with the equivalent funding as if the town had annexed into the fire district. And so the town pays that amount to the fire district. So it's kind of the equivalent funds for the equivalent service. So we provide the same service to the town as we do in the county, and the equivalent money comes in for that too.
I have a question. Does the
Yes.
town collect that mill levy from the citizens, or is the town paying it out of their fund?
So the town, so they collect sales tax, they do have a mill levy in place and all of that. So it's really the town can pay us whatever they want. I'm not sure if
You
they've
don't
got
know
it.
how they pay it.
I'm not sure if it's a dedicated fund. I think it just comes out of general fund.
I'm not sure either.
So, yeah, but like I said, however they collect it, they can.
Well, I just wanted to thank
As long as I get a check, I really don't. You know, and really when we get into kind of the operation of what the town was before trying to operate their own fire department with capital expenditures, it's definitely a better, I definitely feel it's better service to the community as well as economically it's better for the community.
There's a lot more coverage.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, you know, we've got a lot more resources out there to be able to respond.
So with the new assessment that went out, will you get a bump in revenue to spend on your budget to hire more people? Or?
Yeah, so I've got some, well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that in just a second there when we get there. So, so we'll kind of move on to, so property taxes where the biggest part of our funding comes from, through the mill levy. We cannot impose sales taxes or anything like that as a special district. So our mill levy is 3.936 mills. And when we looked at, actually did a comparison sheet out of 280 fire districts in the state, if we put the mill levies from lowest to highest, we are number 60 from the lowest. We've operated on the same mill since the district was created. We've never had a tax increase. And we've been pretty proud about with what we can do on that 3.936 mills, but everything's getting more expensive. So to give you an idea of funding, so property tax, you know, as I said, is the biggest portion of that. In 2023, we're estimating 1.2 million coming from property tax to be able to operate on. And, you know, if you figure operating 6 fire stations, all the apparatus, all of that, it's not a whole lot. We do get specific ownership tax. So when you register your vehicle, we get a small portion of that, about $130,000 a year. Buena Vista pays us $358,000 this year for fire service. And our total operating budget's about $1.9 million on there. When you figure staffing, all of that stuff, it unfortunately dwindles down quite a bit. You know, and the other thing that we're always looking for with, well, I guess kind of back to your point with the bump. Yeah, we will, you know, average, depending on how many people fight the valuations, all of that, you know, one thing that is good for us when we see valuations go up is more money. So, you know, that 30 to 50% would be great. I think at 30%, we figured that'd be about, I think I came up with about 300,000 extra. The downfall is that trying to base that off hiring staff with that is at some point we've got to see a decrease in that, and we don't want to fully base staff off of that of possibly losing money. You know, the last recession we had, it wasn't until 2019 that we actually saw a budget as high as when the recession hit. We took a dip for almost 10 years, and so that hit us pretty hard. Now we're finally able to get up there. And the other thing we're always looking at too is, you know, today is actually the last day of the legislative session, and we follow that closely. Every legislative session seems to have something that affects us or costs us more money, and so we're always keeping up on this. And so it's always nice to see a reduction in the residential assessment rate, anything like that, because you don't have to pay as much taxes. That hits us. We did, I don't know how many of you guys are aware, several years ago, we went for a revenue stabilization initiative, which did pass, and that's great that the voters approved us to do that. So what that allows us to do is not have the big hit. So if the residential assessment rate drops, we're able to raise the mill levy just enough to be able to be the equivalent as if we were still at the 7.2% residential assessment rate, which in 23, that accounted for about $45,000, which is great being able to maintain that. But as they keep on messing around with Gallagher, how they're, well, now that Gallagher's gone, but what they're going to do, nobody really knows. So we're always constantly watching that because that all affects our funding and our ability to provide what we need to the community. And like I said, everything's just, fortunately, gets more expensive. We spend about $5,000 a month on fuel, just responding to calls and all of that. And it used to not be that high.
Yeah.
Boots. Our boots, I fell over when somebody told me the price of boots. They just had a price increase. Just our basic fire boots that we have to replace every 10 years, even if they're in perfect shape, are $750 for a pair of boots. And a new fire engine, $750,000. It's kind of outrageous. So with that, I mean, we kind of look at what the future is going to look like. It's definitely one of the things in the future is expanding our resident program, trying to find a way to get more people up here, have that 24-hour response. The other thing that we face too is, when I first started trying to get in the fire service and get hired, I tested for Colorado Springs fire, Denver fire, all of that, and there was 5,000 to 10,000 people applying for 30 jobs. It was outrageous. Now we see fire departments actually trying to get hiring bonuses just to get people through the door, which is something we've never seen before either. It's, so we start to wonder too, what's the future? If we can't get volunteers, are we going to be able to get paid firefighters, or how that's going to look? Like everybody likes playing video games and all that stuff. It's not as hard of work. It's,
The 7 that you just graduated on this first level, are they committed to stay here for a certain period of time, or can they peel off and go to a different fire department?
So, yeah, they can. Well, one of our resident firefighter just went through it. He's committed to 2 years. Everybody else, they can travel on. And most of what we see is, anybody that's younger that's going through the academies are usually doing it not because they want to be a volunteer and serve the community here. They see that as a career path. And so we, unfortunately, that's just part of the cost of doing business is, we get them while we can, and wish them the best when they go somewhere else. That's the unfortunate thing. So other things we've got looking in the future is, we talked about volunteerism down, but we've kind of got another thing we're looking at is we're evaluating additional stations. We have a Station 6 committee, which is evaluating putting a station in Game Trail. Years ago, I think it was probably mid-2000s, Game Trail actually had a lot set aside for the fire department to build a fire station on. Of course, at that time, I think they wanted fully staffed, all of that. The fire district didn't have the money for that, and it was kind of deeded back to them. Well, the conversations come back up. One of the things that we're working with this committee in is, it's great to have a fire station, but we've got to have people to staff it. And so they've put together a couple volunteer drives, and if we can get a large amount of volunteers to start training and start responding to stuff, we're going to evaluate a little bit more about putting that game trail station. Unfortunately, trying to find some of the money, and money's difficult, you've got to do grants and everything like that, but that's kind of the easy part when compared to trying to get volunteers. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. What that actually would help us do is improve our ISO assessment. So ISO is basically our grading for the fire department on how well we do. But the assessment itself is not just 100% us. Of the total score, 40% is actually the fire department, 10% is dispatch, and then 50% is our water supply. And so when we look at our fire district, we've got 1,000 square miles, about 6 square miles actually have fire hydrants. So that's a little bit of a challenge that we look at. The other thing ISO looks at is whether you're within 5 miles of a fire station. And currently right now, the entrance to Game Trail is right at 5 miles from many of our fire stations. And so where the benefit with ISO is insurance companies look at that. Anybody's tried to get insurance lately or change insurance, it's difficult. People don't want to insure them, especially with all these fires going. So trying to do what we can to provide the best response we can. So that's things that we're looking at in the future. And then, ultimately looking at evaluating our staffing needs. Unfortunately, a lot of our volunteer firefighters right now have been doing it for a while. And as they get older, there's less they can do. And we're, kind of get to the point that they don't want to get out of bed at 3 a.m. And so that's one thing we've got to look at the future is sustainability and where we're going to go with that. So we're in the strategic planning process right now of really looking at these things. How can we change the volunteer program to get some more volunteers active and respond, but also what are we going to have to do, staffing wise? Are we going to have to hire more 24-hour staff? How's that going to look? So that's a big part where we're at right now. And to be able to do that, we've got to evaluate funding and how we do all that. Grants, they do have several grants for hiring staff, but most of those are only good for a couple of years. Basically give you the full amount for the first year, 3/4 second year, half for the third year, then you've got to be able to support it. But you can't really, we've got to find a way to support it for the long term. We do utilize quite a few grants. Most of our mitigation programs right now are funded through grants, but at some point those are going to die off. So we've got to be able to figure out how to maintain these programs, and that's what we're actively working on right now. So it's kind of the end of my thing. I don't know if anybody's got any more questions or.
I have a question.
Yeah.
They're talking about building this big new subdivision back here on the other side of the road.
Mhm.
They come and talk to you about that
Yes.
before they come up with putting 200 homes in this teeny
So,
space?
so we evaluate stuff based on the fire code. So our biggest portion of that is road widths and so forth. In fact, kind of a funny story, we had a conversation with town planning department arguing over the width of the lanes. 9 foot is in the town's code, 10 foot is fire code. And so we brought the planning department down to our fire station, put cones out at 9 foot, put them behind the wheel of the fire engine and said, okay, have fun, go through there. And one of them hit every cone going down there. So that's the big thing where we get involved on some subdivisions is the road width, making sure they've got the turning radius. And then if there's any multifamily occupancies, anything like that over 30 feet tall, we've got to have access for our tower truck, our big aerial ladder. So otherwise, like I said, residential reviews, we don't do anything in there. It's when it's 4 units or more is where we get involved in the building itself. But
So the availability of water for firefighting would not come under your
no, so that portion's the town's responsibility there. Where we get involved is when there's sprinkler systems on commercial stuff. But we have people a lot smarter than us that are fire protection engineers figure out if there's the water supply to be able to maintain that. Yep.
So I have 2 questions.
Okay.
We had people come by with fire camp to do some burning of our Missouri Park ditch.
Mm-hmm.
Is that under your auspices?
So it's kind of a weird combination. So the owner of fire camp is Kent Maxwell. So he's one of my battalion chiefs. So he does that, but he operates fire camp, which is a separate nonprofit that's to be able to educate firefighters. And they have firefighters from all over the country come and take classes there. So they're connected in a way just because of who owns it, but that's completely independent when they're actually out there doing the burning and working there.
Is that at Ponderosa?
Yes, yep.
Yes, whatever they call it, Ponderosa.
Ponderosa Lodge.
Up on Monarch.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, if you live in a subdivision where you have cisterns, how often should those cisterns be checked for water and probability?
So ideally by the homeowners group, it should be checked annually at least. And we go out and we test them. So if there's a group that hasn't checked them well or don't know how to, you can contact us and somebody from the fire marshal office will come out and be able to show you how to check them and actually hook our trucks up and make sure we can get water out of them. But we've got close to 400 cisterns around the county. So it's hard for us to get out there and test them on a regular basis, but if there is a concern about one, we can come out and do that.
So her question was about cisterns.
Mhm.
I didn't quite hear it, but, because we have one for our little 9-home subdivision, and our HOA does test the water level annually and report that at our HOA meeting, but we've never, because the stem is on our property, and I always thought, well, is that still regulation? I mean, you guys would show up and they wouldn't be able to hook into that, you know? Could that be checked somehow?
Yeah, just contacting us and
Okay.
getting on the schedule. We can come out with the truck, make sure it flows, make sure we have good access. Over the last couple of years, we've done a couple different homeowners groups to improve our access to it because it's hard to get in there with some of our big trucks.
Are they not installed anymore, or is that kind of?
They are. So every new subdivision that's put in there, they've got a couple different options we look at. So if it's a minor tract subdivision, which is basically 4 lots or less, it requires a 6,000 gallon cistern. Anything bigger than that requires 15,000 up to the first 30 lots, and then another 15,000 for every 15,000 after that. So like Centerville Ranch down there was a big subdivision, 60 lots had to put in 30,000 gallon cistern. So that's required on any subdivision going in the rural area that doesn't have hydrants. We do have a way that we can evaluate our water source. If we've got a good water source within a mile, they can have an option of doing payment in lieu, which is the equivalent price of a cistern, but they pay the fire department to improve our water supply capacity. Because sometimes it's a little bit faster to drive to a pressurized hydrant than to be able to hook up to that cistern. But cisterns are very important to our operations.
Robert,
Yeah.
you also have, like, we have a pond on the ranch that has access for you to come pump out of it. It's got
Mhm.
this place. So do you have any of the other of those around at some ranches where there's ponds?
So we've got a few different things. We've got ponds around. We can pull out of a lot of the rivers. We actually have a couple really good irrigation wells that we've got a connection out on 270 that we can put on there and be able to fill our trucks. So we try to get as creative as possible
Just don't
with getting water.
cancel the hookup.
That's right.
On your water trucks, is
Mhm.
it just one water truck per station?
Yeah.
And how many gallons of water does it hold?
So depending on which truck it is, anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 gallons.
And those are under pressure when they spray out?
So the water trucks actually they do have a pump, but we use gravity to do it. We have big old about 1 foot wide chutes where we can drain that whole 2,500 gallons into a tank in just a couple minutes. So kind of our operation, what we do is when we go out to rural fires, we're going to roll a water truck and our engine together. And depending on which combination we have, when we get there, we can initially just hook them together, and we've got 3,500 gallons to be able to start fighting the fire. And then from there, each of our water trucks carry a tank that we can drop on the ground and empty the truck into. So we've got a lot of water. And what we'll do is it's called a water shuttle, is we'll start running water trucks that come over, dump water, go back and fill, and just running in a circle. And that kind of keeps our water supply up.
So you and I live fairly close together. Is that how y'all would fight a fire at your house or my
Yep.
house? That's how it would be done?
Yep, because the hydrant down the road from us is just for show.
An irrigation ditch that runs behind our property, and we don't have any water rights to it. Is that something that how would we even know if you would be able to use that water? Is it in the,
If there's water and I can get it out of there,
you would?
I'll take it. We actually carry damming material in our brush trucks. So on these smaller irrigation ditches, we can get a better puddle of water in there for doing it. Yeah, it's one thing with firefighting, and there's quite a few different things about firefighting ponds that's gone through legislation in the last couple of years and really trying to do that. But ultimately, for local fire departments, we can go and take the water from just about anywhere. Where it gets more complicated is when it turns into a big federal fire. They've got to get a lot more permissions to be able to start using it, and then they've had instances where they've had to reimburse people for the water or fish that they killed and all of that. So
We bought one of the green signs through your department, and not everybody in our subdivision has one. But now with GPS, do people need those? I mean, because a lot of people have fancy little addresses, but you can't read them.
yeah, so the reflective green ones are great, especially for,
They're like $8 or something,
yeah,
$10.
if you get ambulance trying to find you, GPS still isn't that accurate around here.
No, it's not.
ambulance, FedEx, anything like that. And we always tell people that if your house is on fire, eventually we'll see it, but we'd rather get there, be able to see the address and see it a lot sooner.
So where do we get those signs?
So at our Station 1, we make them. We sell them for $15. We just had to increase the price because it was costing us a couple dollars for every time you bought a sign. And that's one thing I didn't mention in here is the new land use code through the county. One of the things we fought probably 8 years ago was on driveway regulations. It was taken out of our land use code. So really right now, you do not have to have a driveway go into your house that a fire truck can make it up, or even an ambulance. You don't even have to have a driveway. You could put it in and take it out. So we've been working with the commissioners and all of that to be able to put some updates in the land use code. Like I said, we've been working on this for a while. We're pretty happy with some of the stuff that's going into it. There's going to be a wildland urban interface portion on there. If you're going to build out in the middle of the forest, having some regulations on what kind of building materials to use to try to save your house. Doing some initial clearing around the house, some mitigation work in that first 10 feet outside of there in land use code. The reflective signs is going to be a requirement for new development, that you will have to put a reflective sign on your house when you build it.
Or your driveway.
On the driveway. Park County does that. So we've got that. The other stuff we're putting in there is actually driveway widths and driveway grades, which is going to be huge for us. I mean, we've got some that I drive a small pickup that it's in the summer it's difficult for me to get up some of these driveways, let alone some of our large apparatus. I mean, unfortunately, we have some subdivisions that, just in the dry, it's hard to get even up the roads. If anybody's familiar with Eagles Roost, up above Mount Princeton Hot Springs, there's a road that zigzags up there. In the summer, it's hard for us to get a fire engine up there. So we're really trying to work to be able to make this safer for people. The unfortunate thing is you may accept that risk that nobody can get to you, but the next person doesn't realize that you took that risk when they buy it. So, so that's exciting for us as a fire district, being able to get this stuff back in the land use code. So
what's the width of a fire? I gotta go and measure my 2 posts. What is the width of a fire truck?
So the width of most of our fire engines are about 8 foot, but if you take the mirrors into account, they're 10'3". We actually had one of the wildlife fencing gates that they put up. It was 10 foot wide. There's some of our engines couldn't get through it to get to the house. So they're working on that. But
Do you anticipate full-time employee firemen?
so that's the one thing we're evaluating, but I definitely see that's probably going to be something in the near future that we're going to have to look at 24-hour staffing. And that's through the strategic planning process, trying to figure out if we do staffing, that costs money. How are we going to get there? So,
Chief, could you talk a little bit about just how you coordinate with Salida and I think the Forest Service when you declare a high risk? And what that restricts or the different levels it restricts for homeowners? Yeah, so there's a couple different things, and it gets kind of confusing, especially this time of year. So right now we're in moderate fire danger. So the fire danger, we've all decided we're going to coordinate with the Forest Service. They're the ones that go up and pull fuel moistures. But this is up in the forest. And they pull fuel moistures and kind of give us what the fire danger is. So if you've noticed on any of the signs, we're at moderate, right? We just went from low to moderate. But this time of year is when the valley floor is very dry. And we have the potential for our largest fires. Usually it's in the spring when we get the 40, 50 acre fires down on the south end of the county. Or at Suzy's place. So the valley floor is a little bit different on there. So that's why we're in stage 1 restrictions right now. So fire restrictions really gets a lot more complicated. So myself, Chief Best with Salida Fire, and the sheriff coordinate and come up with a determination of whether we should go in fire restrictions or not for Chaffee County. So we've got the outside of Chaffee County, which the sheriff put restrictions on. The town of Buena Vista I impose the restrictions for the town of Buena Vista. And the way we've been operating, if the county goes into restrictions, we're going to move the town of Buena Vista into restrictions. The city of Salida they can move in and out of restrictions as they want as well. But where it really gets difficult is we've got BLM can put their own restrictions on, and then Forest Service has restrictions. So if you go up into 4 Mile, if you don't know if you're in BLM, State Trust Lands follows our county because that's our responsibility, and then Forest Service, you may have
variation in restrictions. You know, right now we get a bunch of calls. The last few days we've been getting a lot of calls for Browns Creek area because you can have fires up there, but in Mesa Antero you cannot right now. So this year is very tough with that. In an ideal world, we're going to all go in restrictions at the same time. The county, we can go in restrictions just like that. The Forest Service usually takes a couple days to make the declarations and do that. So,
About 20 years ago, we had to evacuate where we used to live because of a fire. And I've been wondering ever since then, what should I have done with the barbecue in the big propane container?
so the propane for the house itself or the barbecue?
Just for the barbecue.
Ideally, put it 20 feet out away from the house.
That's
Is always a
about
better thing.
20 feet?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, you know, and most of the time when the fire comes through, it will melt some of the stuff off, and then it's really not as catastrophic as most people think. After a big fire comes through, it melts hoses or valves, and it just sprays up fire and is controlled at that point.
Yeah,
So-
the thought of having a propane tank in a vehicle and getting hit, you know, we didn't need to add insult to injury.
Yeah.
This is one of those controlled burns.
Yeah. Leave it there, take combustibles off your porch if you gotta leave, and then just leave. And usually when it gets to that point, we come in with crews, we'll start moving wood piles and everything, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
And very informative.
No problem.
This is for this fire department. You know, we did have a fire on March 23rd at the ranch that started from a burn that was out, had been out for 6 weeks, and the wind blew up those, and they were out there. I don't know how many people you had. There were people all over. The only bad thing is that I was coming from a Sangre meeting, and they weren't going to let me go through, but luckily it was bird placard, and I said, I'm going through. But you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Buttering you up.
I hope I never have to call you again.
Exactly.